Hey people, it's Duke, and this is the start of Doctor Who Week 2. And like I said, this isn't just going to be all classic, and it's going to be new, and it's also going to feature big finishes. But I figured we'd do something classic. So classic that I have no word for it. We're going to talk about The Unearthly Child, the very first Doctor Who story ever. I want to say I had no high hopes going into this. I kind of did. I'm just like, I didn't want to put too much pressure on it because it was the first. Not to mention, this is a show that's been, had its fair share of retcons and has had more continuity added to it. So I have to say I tried my best to, have an open mind on it. And for the most part, that's the best way to go with this one. I will have to say that up front, it's cool to hear the theme song, which is the same theme song they use up until pretty much the end of Tom Baker's run. I think they replaced it during his last season. If not, they changed it with Peter Davison. But okay, let me get the whole idea out here. And this is the whole summary. I'm not going to spoil every plot and twist, but I'm going to give the story here. So, there are there's two teachers, Ian and Barbara. They both have noticed this student called Susan Foreman. They notice that she's, brilliant, but the fact that she acts weird and... Okay, here's a key example here. I know I'm not giving too many spoilers, but they're doing a math problem, and she starts talking in, I think it's decimals. It's currency. And she's talking about how they haven't switched to the current money system yet, which is kind of an odd thing, which eventually happened, of course, but it makes more sense. So they notice something weird, so they decide to do the obvious thing that teachers will do: stalk their student. You think that's weird. The weirder part is they leads them to a junkyard. They eventually find an old man who in no way is weird or mysterious. Okay, fine, he's William Hartnell. He's obviously the doctor. They find out that the police box that they're living in is a spaceship that travels through time as well. And then that pushes off into the journey where they spend 3 episodes fighting off cavemen. That's kind of a rough idea of the story. There's more to it, though. Up front, I want to say this. William Hartnell, I just loved him here. You can kind of see, the basic parts that a lot of the doctors eventually would take up, but you gotta admit, he's the archetype thing. I wasn't sure if some of these details were taken by other doctors, and eventually that is how it works. A lot of people bring in newer parts of the role. Some of the newer ones seem to be mashups of older ones when you look at it. Hartnell's doctor is intelligent, but he kind of in a way doesn't like to take shit. Anytime he talks to Ian, he basically just ignores his existence and talks down to him. And that's kind of the way he is. He's playing to the more grandfatherly aspect. He's not trying to be your friend like Matt Smith is to Amy. And he's trying not to be your big brother like Peter Davison was to Nyssa and Tegan. He's basically playing the teacher on the field trip. Which works because the way the show was written and thought out as, it was supposed to be a mixture of a fun sci-fi adventure, but it was also supposed to be an educational program, which is why we came here to caveman times to learn about how cavemen discovered fire. His granddaughter Susan, played by Carol Ann Ford, I liked her. She's basically just playing the young girl who explains why the doctor's just so grumpy and surly to her teachers. And I will admit, both her and Hartnell, they have this alien kind of personality to them where they just kind of look at like Ian and Barbara, who are our human analogs that, we learn all the information from. And anytime there's something spacey, they're our window into it because the doctor will tell them what's happening. The way they do look at it, I love the way that there's just this small tinge of weird not the same species-wise. I don't know what it is, but I think it's the fact that there are times in this story where the Doctor and Susan, sorry, I'm sore throat, are basically looking at this. It's different, but it's not too out of the ordinary. They time travel all the time, apparently. But of course, Ian and Barbara being, well, from the real world, they have no idea what the hell's going on. And I think that's it. The fact that Susan and the Doctor are looking at the weird and not really shrugging, versus the other two who are scared out of their minds. And since we're talking about them so much, I want to talk about both of them. My real problem is, and that's another issue I just want to address. There's not a giant amount of character to anyone. The thing I've really paced for them is right now they're just having the standard interactions, but trying their way to survive. You feel bad. These two weren't planning on being in caveman times. That you do identify with them, and which is a good thing. They're gonna be your window to how all this stuff works. So it's good that you at least like the characters. And then the cavemen themselves, they're acting like the stereotypical cavemen you usually see in these types of stories. Acting grush and complaining about how they'll never find fire. And again, that's the thing I want to point out. See, to me, this arc isn't a 4-episode long story. It's one episode that leads into a 3-episode story. I don't know why, I can't put it on my finger, but the episode, which is called An Unearthly Child, in fact, that's the thing, up until I think closer to the end of Hartnell's run, every episode had an individual title. And the only one I remember is the first one, because, well, it's the same title as the story. But the first episode is very much its own self-contained thing. I want to say it's kind of the purpose of what maybe a .1 issue for Marvel is today, or what a 0 issue tends to try to do, or, God forbid, a number 1, but the thing is, number 1s nowadays tend to be a part of the story. I'm not saying this doesn't fit in. It kind of works the same way that all the stories in this era work more, because the way it worked is every story led into the next one. For example, this story on Unearthly Child will lead into the Daleks. Here, it has that feeling. It doesn't, only because it's all, for the most part, it's all either at the school, at the junkyard, or in the TARDIS. And then they get out, and boom, they're in caveman times for the next 3. I think it's just the settings, and that's what makes the story feel different. They could have changed the setting at all, and I would have had the same feeling. Another thing I want to add, and this is an odd thing to add because it's not exactly purposeful, because this is just the way they made it back then, but the black and white really helps the atmosphere. It gives it this weird kind of horror feel to it, which is why Twilight Zone's fun to watch. Classic 60s Twilight Zone, because they had to rely on lighting more than anything else. And it works here. And that's a part of the show that I've noticed. I've seen very little black and white era stuff, but I love how somehow the lack of color, just the fact that it's shadows and lighting, that just gives it this little tinge of terror that helps the story along. Back to Hartnell. I don't know if I want to say he's completely in this role, because besides this and the Daleks, I haven't seen too much with him yet. But I will say this, he was a lot of fun to watch, especially how he tries tricking out the cavemen. And he does it in a clever way, not in a simple try and scare them by undermining them. Basically what he tried to do with Ian and Barbara. He actually tries to fight these cavemen because he's trying to play on their hunting instincts. Simply, oh God, he's been accused of murder, so he has to figure out how to trick them, but not in a goofy way, in a clever way. And that's how the Doctor should operate. He should never have to do the point somewhere and make them believe there's something behind them trick. He should actually have to use his mind to do it. Put a little bit more effort into it. Granted, the just look over there one sounds easy, but it's obviously a cheat, and let's face it, fucking ridiculous. Here, it's proving that this character has brains around him, and will represent how much he'll use that in future stories. Not just with this actor, but with every actor, especially McCoy. All the other characters are just kind of serving the point of, oh dear God, we're in this strange place, how scary. Ah! I know I mentioned the fact that Susan's kind of looking at the time travel aspect normally, but still, she's obviously afraid. And she plays damsel in distress big time most of the time, screaming at all the cavemen chasing after her. And I have no big problem with that because, well, it's kind of obvious that she's playing this. She's a 20-year-old actress playing a young girl. What else do you expect? Yes, she's probably somewhere close to the same intelligence as her grandfather, but I'm not shocked. The other two are basically the same. Ian's trying to be proactive and trying to fight back and think with the Doctor, much to the Doctor's distaste. But that's the thing. They're just playing for the rounds, and that's not a problem. It manages to be a fun adventure. So, all in all, I think this is a fun little story. It's obviously a good place to start when in the classic era. Would I recommend this as a new fan? I would, but I think you need to make sure you get a good feel of the show first, and then look at the humble beginnings. It's really fun to, since I've seen I've seen all of the new show so far. So going back to this was a fun little nostalgic trip. And plus, it gave you a good idea of how it works. Now, before I go on, I want to say this. Like a lot of the other ones, it has a slower pace being serialized, but in the end, I think you'll like it.